On the night of June 17, 1803, the city of Lima fell into an uncanny stillness. Streets once filled with the noise of carts and footsteps became mute, as if the air itself refused to move. In the upper quarter of Calle de las Flores, the lanterns of the Marquise de Villalobos estate dimmed one after another until only darkness remained. By morning, every person inside that house had vanished. The Marquise, her 3 daughters, and all 8 servants were gone without a trace. Only one thing remained at the entrance, a parchment nailed to the heavy oak doors. A strange black symbol had been burned into its surface. Beneath it were the words, "The bloodline has been claimed." The officials called it madness, a hoax perhaps, or an act of rebellion. But older residents whispered that the Marquise had long kept a man beneath her home, an enslaved African said to know forbidden words from a forgotten faith. His name was Adisa, and no one had spoken it aloud since the disappearance. 2 centuries later, the ruins of that mansion still stand behind iron gates, sealed by the government and left to rot. Yet those who live nearby claim that, on certain nights, the windows flicker with a faint light, as if the house remembers something the city has tried to erase. The investigation began at dawn. Soldiers entered the Villalobos estate to find every room untouched, tables set for supper, candles melted to the wick, and garments laid neatly across beds. Yet there were no footprints, no signs of struggle, and no trace of human presence. In the great hall, a wooden chair lay overturned inside a circle drawn in dark chalk. Around it were lines and symbols unfamiliar to the priests called to bless the place. One of them, Father Ibarra, tried to record the markings in his notes. He never finished. The final line in his report stops mid-sentence, the ink smeared as if the quill had fallen from his hand. Rumors soon spread through the servants' quarters of Lima's wealthy families. The Marquise, they said, had purchased Adisa from an auction near Callao in 1796. He was no ordinary laborer. He carried small, ivory charms, whispered to himself in the dark, and refused to eat food that had not been blessed in a language no one could understand. When asked about him, the Marquise always gave the same answer. He is a man who listens to the earth. Her ledger contained 1 chilling note written months before the family's disappearance. The man below is no longer to be fed. In 1803, Lima's elite had little curiosity for the lives of the enslaved. They were property, shadows at the edge of candlelight. But Adisa's story lingered because it could not be contained by silence. He had been brought from the coast of Angola, passing through Cartagena before arriving in Peru. Some said he was captured for his defiance. Others claimed he surrendered willingly. What frightened those who encountered him was not his strength, but the calm with which he endured captivity. When he was delivered to the Villalobos estate, he asked only one question: "Do you bury your dead deep enough?" Servants reported that strange things began to happen soon after. The garden's soil turned black and soft like ash. The family's youngest daughter claimed she heard voices through the floorboards, voices that repeated prayers backward. The Marquise dismissed it as superstition, yet she kept Adisa chained in the cellar, beneath the oldest part of the house. One night, a maid was sent to bring him water. She never returned. The next morning, her bucket was found at the foot of the stairs, filled with salt instead of water. The Marquise forbade anyone to go below again. From that night on, the house began to change. Within days of the investigation, all official documents regarding the Villalobos estate began to vanish. Reports from the governor's office were misplaced, the parish copies went missing, and even private correspondences between clerics were removed from archives. When a clerk named Sebastian tried to reconstruct the files from memory, his notes were confiscated, and he was dismissed from service. Before leaving Lima, he spoke only once about what he'd seen. He claimed the disappearance was deliberate. The church, he whispered, buried the truth deeper than the bodies. Yet one record survived, a sermon transcript written by Father Ibarra. In it, he described the Marquise's final confession before she disappeared. She had spoken of guilt, of inheritance, and of a shadow that moved through her home without footsteps. The priest ended the document with a single Latin line, "Et domus erit sepulchrum," and the house shall be the tomb. Weeks before her disappearance, the Marquise de Villalobos had grown withdrawn. Her letters to the archbishop grew erratic, written in hurried fragments. She spoke of dreams where her ancestors' portraits whispered from the walls, their painted eyes blackened and hollow. In her final letter, she admitted to having broken a promise. Years earlier, in a desperate attempt to save her dying husband, she had allowed Adisa to perform a ritual of protection. When her husband miraculously recovered, she refused to repay the promise she had made to the man. The promise, she wrote, was not gold, not freedom, but remembrance. Her last written line was found scratched into the wood of her writing desk. The living cannot own what remembers them. The surviving servants of the Villalobos household told inconsistent stories. One swore she saw Adisa praying over the family altar. Another insisted he could move without casting a shadow. Most, however, agreed on one detail. The Marquise's daughters often disappeared for hours into the cellar, returning pale and silent. After the family vanished, 2 of those servants tried to flee Lima. Their carriage overturned near the Rimac River, and neither body was found. The last surviving witness, an old man named Tomas, died in 1820. In his final days, he claimed that the family's portraits still aged in the sealed house, their faces changing over time. By 1804, the church had declared the Villalobos estate cursed and placed it under ecclesiastical ban. The bishop ordered the structure sealed, its remaining valuables confiscated, and the land consecrated. He also forbade any mention of the Marquise's name in sermons or public documents. Yet the bishop himself died the same year. His private diary revealed that he had kept one of the relics taken from the cellar, the bone comb. His final entry read, "The comb hums softly at night. I have locked it away, but it calls for her." The artifact was never found in the decades that followed. Strange phenomena haunted the neighborhood of Calle de las Flores. The ground would split without tremor. Birds would not nest in the trees. And whenever a new family attempted to build on the ruins, a fine white dust would rise from the soil, coating everything. Locals began calling it the breath of the house. Those who tried to sweep it away found it returned each morning, thicker than before. In time, even the bravest masons refused to work there in the decades that followed. Strange phenomena haunted the neighborhood of Calle de las Flores. The ground would split without tremor. Birds would not nest in the trees. And whenever a new family attempted to build on the ruins, a fine white dust would rise from the soil, coating everything. Locals began calling it the breath of the house. Those who tried to sweep it away found it returned each morning, thicker than before. In time, even the bravest masons refused to work there. In 1899, a Spanish historian named Mateo Ordóñez arrived in Lima to study colonial archives. He heard the legend of the Marquise and petitioned for access to the sealed property. After bribing officials, he entered the ruins one night with 2 assistants. Only one assistant returned. He described hearing voices beneath the floors, speaking in a language that sounded like prayer and breathing combined. Ordóñez's notebook was later found in the street, soaked by rain. On the final page he had written, "He was not a man. He was a wound in time." Ordóñez himself was never seen again. In 1901, linguistic scholars analyzing fragments of the cellar symbols discovered patterns matching an ancient Congo ritual language, one used not for worship, but remembrance. The markings translated roughly to, "Those who forget become the food of memory." The implication terrified the church historians. The Villalobos family had not merely been cursed, they had been absorbed by remembrance itself, trapped in a cycle of spiritual inheritance. When the Peruvian government finally authorized the sale of the Villalobos property, an American collector purchased several relics, furniture, paintings, and fragments of the old foundation. Within months, his mansion in New Orleans burned to the ground. Witnesses said the fire spread unnaturally fast, leaving a perfect ring of untouched earth in the center of the courtyard. Only one object survived, a portrait of the Marquise. In it, her eyes were closed. When the painting was last examined decades later, the eyes were open. In 1936, a Catholic orphanage was built on the outskirts of the old Villalobos land. Soon after, the children began reporting dreams of a woman in lace whispering from the walls. The nuns dismissed it as imagination until one morning when every mirror in the orphanage cracked simultaneously. The institution was abandoned within a year. The building remains, its windows bricked and its corridors filled with dust that glows faintly under moonlight. In the 1950s, a private archive surfaced in Buenos Aires containing letters allegedly written by Adisa himself. Experts debated their authenticity. In one, he described his captivity. "They took me from the river and gave me to a house that does not sleep. It feeds on memory. I do not curse them. I wait for them to remember." No one knows who received those letters. The handwriting matched nothing on record. In 1972, during an excavation near the ruins, archaeologist Ana Morales uncovered human remains buried vertically, as if the earth had swallowed them upright. Tests confirmed they were centuries old. Nearby, she found a fragment of stone bearing a single word etched in both Latin and Kikongo. Amarem. It meant to be remembered. That night, Morales reported hearing whispering beneath her tent. By morning, her notes were blank, the ink lifted clean from every page. In 1987, workers restoring the cathedral found an old envelope sealed with black wax. Inside was a confession dated 1803, signed by Father Ibarra. It read, "The house was never cursed. It was chosen. The woman asked to be remembered forever, and the man granted it. But remembrance is not life. It is hunger." The letter was quietly reburied within church archives. Today, the Villalobos mansion is fenced and unmarked. Locals avoid the street after sunset. Some say the walls still shift in the dark, expanding and contracting like a slow breath. Others claim the soil smells faintly of salt and ash after rain. Historians who attempt to study the site often encounter inexplicable technical failures. Cameras malfunction, files erase themselves, batteries drain in minutes. In 2003, a photographer documenting colonial ruins captured an image of the estate's courtyard. When developed, the photograph showed a figure standing in the shadows of the archway, tall, silent, head bowed. Forensic experts confirmed no one had been present. Under magnification, the figure's face appeared obscured, but faintly visible above it were symbols identical to those found in the cellar. In 2015, a museum curator received a crate labeled Villalobos artifacts, with no sender's name. Inside was the silver cross once believed lost. When she touched it, she described a sudden rush of cold air and the distant echo of a woman's voice saying, "Do you remember me?" She left her post within weeks, claiming she could no longer distinguish between memory and dream. The cross was never catalogued. 2 centuries have passed since the night Lima stopped breathing. The Villalobos name has been erased from records, its story reduced to whispers and ghost tales told to frighten children. Yet the house still stands, a ruin of stone and shadow, older now than the city that surrounds it. Some say the curse was never about revenge, but remembrance. That Adisa's promise was kept, that every name spoken in that house became part of it. When the wind moves through the broken halls, it carries faint voices, layered and endless. If you listen closely, they do not ask for mercy. They ask only one question: "Do you remember us?"